Thanks everybody for joining us today. We're so glad that you could be part of this webinar with us. We're going to be talking about event planner meets AV producer, all the dirty secrets. So today we have two great speakers with you that are going to share some insights, and we'll get to an intro of them here in a minute. Before we get started, we just wanted to tell you a few quick housekeeping things. First of all, we will be sending a recording to you, so don't feel like you have to take notes fast and furious. We'll send that information so you can review it, as well as the slides from today. You can ask a question at any time during the webinar, though we probably will hold them until the end unless it's something that's super relevant to the story they're sharing. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in as soon as you think of it. Again, we will be sending the webinar recording, so don't worry about that. So I want to introduce our two great hosts today. We have Jodi Collen. She's a CSEP and is the Senior Director of the University Events at Augsburg in Minneapolis, and has been working in experimental marketing and events for 18 years. And just a fun fact about Jodi, she's attended 22 Kenny Chesney concerts. So can you talk a little bit about that and what keeps you going back, Jodi?
What makes me such a groupie?
Yeah.
Well, I think it mostly stems from a love of just the experience of the live music.
Yeah.
And I have been to 22 Kenny Chesney concerts, but hundreds and hundreds of concerts in general. And it's amazing to be able to see the kind of production aspect of it and to see somebody put on a show. And my friends always tell me that I'm the big nerd that is spending more time watching the truss and the moving stage pieces and trying to figure out how it all works and understanding the sort of what makes it happen.
Totally.
Which is, I think, what is a big part of what makes me keep going back.
That's awesome. I love looking at all that stuff as well when I go to concerts too. So, so fun to hear that there's other nerds out there like me. Jon Young has experienced just about every side of the event planning and production throughout his career, which 15 years ago led him to start Heroic Productions, an AV production company located in Bloomington, Minnesota, and he hasn't looked back since. So one of the fun facts that we found out about you, Jon, is that you own 5 tuxedos. So can you tell us the story behind that?
I do. I own 5 different sized tuxedos. Let's just leave it at that. In my previous world, I came out of the fundraising world, and I was in hospital fundraising and higher ed, which required lots of gala attendance, and I was also a band leader for 25 years. So I've probably played 150 galas as a band leader, and we were a tuxedo band. So as my age and my size changed, it required new sizes. So I actually do have 5 tuxedos.
Is one of them purple velvet?
None of them are velvet and none of them fit.
I think purple velvet needs to be the next one.
Yeah, I'll work on it. Yeah. Not very hard, but I will work on it.
Okay. I'll make sure you send us a picture.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk in kind of terms of how you would go about planning an event. So we want to talk through the pre-planning process, and then what will happen during your event, what you need to think about there, and then how you can kind of follow up well. So what you need to do in the post process. So we'll be following that format and then asking some questions of each of these two people here to kind of expose some different things that you may not think about as you're planning in the process, and help you be ready to go when you're ready to plan an event. So first we'll start with the pre-event. So planning is a big part of the process, obviously. Jodi, can you tell me about your process for how you get started planning an event?
Absolutely. I spend a lot of time with my internal group. I've got 3 full-time planners that work with me at the university, and we plan and manage about 500 functions a year for the university. And one of the biggest and most important things that I always start with is the clear identification of goals and objectives. I find it very difficult to move forward in the planning process effectively if that question can't be answered clearly by the client, because we will ultimately spend a lot of time chasing our tails or making bad decisions because we don't understand what we're trying to get to if we don't start there. And that actually informs so much of how the decision-making process and the rest of the event happens, it helps you set a better budget because you understand like what the hot points and priorities for your client are. Otherwise, you're really guessing about what you should allocate budget to. And it all, you end up having to sort of stop midway through the process, and when goals are kind of all over the place, trying to get narrowed in on what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves, and that helps you communicate better with your clients and with any partners that you're bringing in. I just believe in asking a lot of questions, generally right out of the gate, like what are you trying to accomplish? What does success look like? And what would be the best possible scenario to come out of this?
Right. That totally makes sense. And I think there's a lot of, you kind of want to jump in and get started without answering those questions a lot of times. And I think it's so important to kind of take that step back.
One of the things that I've learned is the 6 P's of planning. Proper planning prevents pitifully poor performance. And it's sometimes not pitifully, but it's, you get the drift. And it's, you can't communicate enough internally with your vendors, with your venue. Assuming is the downfall of every event.
Yeah.
I often find that I end up feeling a little bit like the Debbie Downer, the negative Nelly in the planning process, because the client can a lot of times get really excited and get running out ahead. And planners and those of us that are working in that role can be guilty of that as well, and to get sucked into that especially. And so it can be really hard and can be really unpopular in that situation to say, I hear all of that, but we actually need to take a, like, hit a pause button for a second and let's go back here and answer these questions that aren't super fun or exciting, but are going to help us make better decisions. And you can get a lot of pushback on that. So it can be unpopular, but I continue to push on it because I think it saves us from making a lot of poor budget decisions and a lot of bad event experiences coming out of it inadvertently.
Yeah. So John, to the pitiful point you made, what are some pitfalls that you feel like are common, that you see a lot, that you've been able to help people avoid when you are involved in the conversation early on?
Well, it's exactly what Jodi just talked about. The primary question that everyone should be asking is, what are you trying to accomplish? Who's the audience? What is the venue? What does success look like? And that seems, I'm surprised that people don't think about that. But if you would just take, like Jodi said, 5 minutes and say, okay, what does it really look like when we're at the pinnacle and it's perfect? Guides all of those questions.
What does it look and feel like?
Yeah,
I think is important.
one of the phrases that I like is fit and finish. And it's different for every event. What does it look and feel like? What's the venue look like? Is it fancy? Is it quiet and easy? Is it super formal? If you can ask those kinds of detailed questions, it makes for less stress and less expense.
Or who's the audience?
Who's your audience? What are you trying to accomplish? Those are incredibly important things to ask on the front end.
Jodi, can you talk a little bit about why you feel it's important to bring your AV partner in as early in the process as possible?
I think it's frankly important to bring all of your event partners in as early as you can in the process. AV, I think, tends to be one that gets brought in really early in the process. And I think that's something that I've learned over the years, sort of through going through the process and understanding what it is that my AV partners can bring to the table. And so I'm not a technical expert. I'm never going to be a technical expert. I like to say I know enough to be dangerous, and to know that I need to bring good people in and to ask good questions to make sure that I'm working with good people. And so I want to have if I go really far down a planning road with somebody and make a lot of decisions about how the stage is going to look, how a show flow is going to run, and make a lot of those budgetary decisions before I've had an opportunity to talk to the people that know a lot more about it than I do, I run the risk of having to start over, making bad decisions. And so I have found it to be more effective to sit down early on in the process, have that conversation around, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's what we want it to look and feel like, here's what we want the fit and the finish to be. Uh, and then that allows them to be creative and to do their best work. I don't think that they come to the table wanting to be order takers or just to say, tell me what equipment you want me to bring and we'll show up with it and we'll make it happen. They get so much more invested in my event if I make them feel like part of my planning team. And they have saved my butt numerous times by making really great recommendations or saving me money where I would have made a different decision if they weren't able to come to the table with a suggestion or a thought or an idea. One of the things I think is a major mistake I see people in the industry do is treating any event partners, but AV especially, like just a thing, like a commodity that goes in the room. And so I know I need the AV, so the stage needs to be lit and somebody needs to be able to hear it, and I need screens. So I'm just going to go out and find the cheapest possible option I can that can provide the thing. And then I'm going to put it in the room and hope for the best. I take the opposite approach to that. Is I would like to make sure that I have people that are invested in my event, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I always end up with the cheapest option, but I find the one that's able to best suit the needs of my event. I think that's super important.
I think the from our end, it's way more fun to be invested in the cause, in the university, in the meeting, in the concept, in the planning, and it allows us to do our job. And but it's bigger than that. It allows us to make this a better, make the world a better place. Make in the case of Jodi, it helps us further the reach of Augsburg University. That's the ultimate goal. That's what success looks like. We get a small part of it in amplifying and illuminating her events, but that's what we like to do. And there's goodwill and good feelings at the end of that. That's what I want to do at the end of the day, is make, in her case, Augsburg a better place, raise more money, tell the story better. That's what we do.
Great. So I know one of the big pieces that is kind of an unknown that I think a lot of event planners don't think about is the venue. I think, I've done enough events to know that every venue is different. Every, you had mentioned before, loading in is different. The space you have to load in is different. The space that you have available for your stage, all of that. Jon, can you give us some specific examples of how those differences between the venues might matter to an event planner?
Yep, absolutely. It comes back to what we've been talking about the last few minutes. What do you want to accomplish? So when you're going to choose a venue, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What's the fit and finish? Are you going to be most satisfied by a hotel ballroom and all of the perks that come with that, or do you want something funky? My band played in airplane hangars. We've played a couple of galas in weird places that were perfect for that event. That would not have worked for another charity. And where's the location? Is it flashy or modest? Is it huge? You want to look like you have a great crowd. If you have 200 and 1,000 seat space, it looks empty. But conversely, if you have 1,000 and a 200 space venue, you didn't plan very well. So all of that, it's proper planning, communication. Everything we've talked about can be solved by great communication and proper planning.
Yeah. Jodi, I know you have some very specific challenges with your venue. Can you talk a little bit about those and how you guys have overcome them together?
Yeah. Well, I would say most event venues have some really weird challenges.
Mhm.
I always thought for a long time it was just us that had all these like weird quirks. You have to like go up to go down and then around the corner and through a hole, and then that you might be able to get something hung up. But I've come to realize over the years that like hotel ballrooms are designed most of the time by people that don't plan events.
Sure.
And so there are almost always things at event venues that make you go, why would they do that?
The loving word is idiosyncrasy.
And so at Augsburg, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, most of our venues aren't built to be event venues first and foremost. They're
Mhm.
almost always built to be something else.
Mhm.
So our most frequently used space at the university is a gymnasium, and we have to turn it into an event space a lot. And so the building has no loading dock. The rigging points are only accessible through these like 2-foot circles in the ceiling that are fixed in their locations, and you
Mhm.
can't move them.
Mhm.
And so you can't just like decide to rig a truss rate here. If there's not rigging points above it that we can access, we can't do that.
Right.
And so in many ways, having partners that know my spaces can really help me out a lot. But it also
On the good side, they used to be 4-foot circles, so or 4-inch circles. So.
Yeah. Uh, but it can also be important to think through some of those things no matter where you're at. Like, we have gotten to know how to tell people how to get in and out of our spaces. You
Right.
need to bring ramps, you need to bring these we need
Yep.
scissor lifts and all of those things. But I think it's important to sort of walk that process for no matter where you are.
Mhm.
So when a vendor shows up at a hotel, where are they going to pull their truck?
Mhm.
I heard somebody tell me that they worked at a hotel in San Diego recently where you can't get access to the loading dock on Sunday ever.
Wow.
And so that's important information to find out before you sign
Exactly.
a contract there, because if your event starts on Monday and you need to load in on Sunday and you can't actually get access to a loading dock, that's a huge problem.
Right.
And so if during the Super Bowl, we had a client show up at our venue and the only way to back a truck up and load in is to have a ramp, and I told them 30 times to bring a ramp, and they didn't. And so they literally had to hand carry everything off their truck into our
Mhm.
building, and that stinks for everybody.
Right.
So
Okay, so the money question. I know that's a big one for a lot of people. Jon, I know it can be tempting from the event planner side to think that I understand the technology well enough to decide what I need and where I need to like spend and skimp. I know I've done that before, but why do you think, and you mentioned this a little bit, but why do you think it's important to consult with your partner before making that decision, or even, let you make that decision on my behalf?
Jodi alluded to it earlier that we fight the battle every day in our world to not be a commodity,
Mm-hmm.
and to be, we want to be, and it's the difference between cost and investment. And again, it comes back to what do you want to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
And we do not, as Heroic, we do not believe that the cheapest is always the best. We want to give value, and that is a non-commoditized look at how you do this. I would argue that the challenge that some event and meeting planners come up with, especially in the nonprofit world where budgets are tight and the fundraising needs are high, that there's a tendency to say every nickel that I don't spend on fill in the blank, food, AV, hotel, et cetera, will be raised for our program, for our needs. And I would argue that if you spend a little bit less time focusing on what version of chicken you're going to have and more time on telling your story,
Mm-hmm.
that at the end, you're going to raise more money, raise more awareness, tell the story better. And that comes out of my world as a nonprofit executive, that I think that we do that well and try to help our customers tell their story better and show them how if we just allocate money a little bit differently, in the long run, it's way more to their advantage.
Mm-hmm. Jodi, what are some ways that you feel like having a partner has helped you manage your budget differently than you might have on your own?
I think it's really tempting at the start of a process, especially when you're working with an internal or client, internal partner or a client or whomever is sort of the quote unquote decision maker on an event. It can be tempting to just assign, you look at your total budget and you assign a percentage to AV, and that's what you stick with. And then we have this much for food and this much. And then you start prescribing an output to your partner that says, I want X and Y and Z, and I can only pay this much for each of those things. And especially when you get really specific about, I can only spend this much on video or this much on audio. I try to, when sitting down with, in my case, and in this instance with Heroic, to say, this is what I want to do. I think this is about how much I have available. How can we make that work?
Mm-hmm.
And if not, tell me what part of this is making it not cost effective for me to be able to do this. And then can we talk about alternatives? Because they know their industry better than I do. And they probably have seen other instances where people have tried to do similar things. So I recently wanted to consider doing a full room wide screen behind my stage.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea if I could afford it, but I was interested in seeing if it was possible. And his team was able to sit down with me, talk through, and the first question they asked was, what are you trying to do with it? Which I think is such an important thing, because so many decisions about equipment like that gets made based on some aesthetic as opposed to what you're actually trying to do with it.
Totally.
And so then you make decisions based on how it looks, and then it doesn't function very well for you.
Totally.
And so if you bring them in to say, this is what I want to do with it, then you can ideally and hopefully accomplish both the aesthetic and the logistics. In my case, the answer was, the only way we can do that is if we rip the ceiling out. And I was like, oh, no, I don't think that's going to work. And so
why not?
I don't know. It seemed like a good idea.
But I appreciate the fact that they were willing to dive into it and take the time, and that it took them a lot of effort to figure that out for me, something I wouldn't have been able to do by myself, and could have been really bad if somebody would have showed up with that screen trying to install it in my space and didn't take the time to say, this is actually going to change the way people see the screen, and in order to do it, we have to hang it here. So I just appreciate that so much. They just know more about it than I do.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on. During the event, we have now, you've done the planning. You're on site. We've talked a lot about what you hope to accomplish from the stage. So hopefully by this point, you're well aware of what you're hoping to accomplish. How do you think, Jon, how do you think it would help if the event go more smoothly when you know that goal, and now everybody on site is on the same page about what that goal is during your event? How do you think that changes things for companies,
for
planners?
Only for the better. It's all about trust, and it's all about communication. And the more you can communicate pre, during, post, the better everything will function. And nobody ever does it enough. We don't, and we want to, and we try to, but it's always trying to say, how can we understand what they're trying to do? It's same side of the table conversation. How are we doing this so that it benefits Augsburg? What is she really trying to do? And ask questions, offer suggestions. It's trust, candor, be positive, but it's, at the end of the day, all about communication.
Okay, so
Can I add something
yeah,
about that really quick?
Go right ahead.
One thing I would say from the planner side is, this is probably might go without saying, but taking the time to sit down and walk through the run of show in explicit detail with the show director from the show caller on site is worth every minute of the time, because that person is going to be able to help communicate all of that detail to the crew that's on site. And if you have the opportunity to do a tech rehearsal, it is worth every minute of time to do that, because that ensures that everybody feels comfortable with what's happening. And the last thing that I would say is take the time to get to know the crew and who is actually working on site with you, and make sure, like, don't just issue demands to them, treat them like they are part of your team. And that's my favorite thing about Heroic, is the crew is amazing. They show up and they give me hugs, and they're so friendly to be on site with. And I think my responsibility is to set the precedent for how my people will from the Augsburg side treats the crew.
Yep.
Because if I treat them poorly, everyone around me is going to treat them poorly. And that kind of relationship is just the most critical thing about event partnerships to me, is that I trust and enjoy working with the people that are on site. And I know that his crew is going to do whatever they need to do to make it successful, because I have a great relationship with them. Awesome. And because obviously it's their job, but I believe in developing that relationship with them. It makes it easier for everybody and more effective in the long run.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, so we have a fuse box is outlets and circuits. I think there's a kind of a funny story around this, but Jodi, have you ever run into something on a show site that's an example of something you hope never happens again?
If an event planner tells you that's never happened to them, they're lying, first of all, because their stuff has gone sideways on every event planner ever. I think that you could sit around a table like this with event professionals and tell war stories for days. And they almost always point back to things that either could have been communicated better, or people that weren't in the know. And so the fuse box example you were given was, I had an event happening in a space, and we had a lot of audiovisual plugged in, we had a lot of equipment plugged in, and all of a sudden everything turned off. Literally the lights, the sound, everything turned off. And for the longest time we could not figure out why. It was all the power should have been adequate. And it turns out that our catering had plugged some hot boxes into an outlet, and blew into an outlet that we didn't know they were going to plug into, and also didn't know that that outlet was connected to fuse boxes that we were running other stuff off of. And so it shut everything down. And so now we do spend a fair amount of time talking about where catering can and can't plug things in,
and what are
they actually bringing to an event site. Power is one of those things that's super confusing to people, that they don't often know how to answer the questions about anyway. And I don't always either. So it can be really important to be able to talk to your facilities folks about, if I plug something in here and here, am I going to shut the building off? Like, because that's it's kind of important for that to stay on.
We use when we go to a new venue, we have a file of all of our venues. What's it like to load in? Where's the power? What's the distance? And even with that, this still happens. And it comes down to, you cannot ask enough questions ever. And especially when you have something that it always happens with the things that seem super fun, the ice cream makers, or we're going to have a crepe maker, or we've had them all. And all of those require power, and all of them require more power than the vendor believes they need.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's always way more than the building can handle.
I had an ice cream machine, like an ice cream dispenser, shut down a generator once at an event, and we could not figure out what was going on. Like inflatables running off the generator would deflate and then reinflate and then deflate. And then we're like, what is going on?
It was really good ice cream though.
Okay, so one other piece that you guys have mentioned a lot was the idea of sticking to a schedule. Jon, can you give us an idea of how, like, what a standard schedule might look like and how certain elements of your AV plan might make you need to adapt that schedule?
First of all, there isn't one. And the second thing I would say is Murphy's Law is the rule of the land when it comes to setting a schedule. You have to have one, and in order to get a schedule, you have at least had some conversation. So we're with Augsburg. I know that my team and Jodi talk a lot, and it still is never perfect. But what it gives you is a frame of reference from which you can deviate and say, okay, if we know that we have 3 hours to get in, and the problem is every decision impacts 5 other things. That's the problem. So if we need to be in at 7 a.m. and Jodi's counting on us being done by 10 with our load in so that the stage guys can come in, the decor people can come in, and if we're an hour and a half late, it backs up everything, and all of a sudden the whole day is shot.
And I'm not very nice to be around at that point either.
No, but nobody is. It's not fun, and and not everybody gets that. You go, well, we'll get there. No, when are you going to get there?
Right.
What are you actually going to do, and how long is it going to take?
That's especially important in a lot of venues where if it's a big enough event and you've got a lot of vendor partners coming that are coming with big trucks, and the only way they can get in and out of the building is either through an loading dock or other access point, and there's a limited number of those.
Right.
If you show up and you haven't thought through logistically, audiovisual needs to come in first because the lights and everything needs to get rigged up into the ceiling. Then the stage needs to get underneath it right away so that they can start focusing, and that the stage backdrop can come in
And
from
the
the
decor
decor
people.
company.
Yeah.
And
Right.
So being able to lay out the order and saying to Dustin at Heroic, how long is it going to take you to get that rig in the air realistically, so that I can tell the rental company to be here, and then rental company, how long do you need to get the stage set and carpeted so that the decor company can show up and get the stage backdrop going, so then the audiovisual company can light it.
Right.
And
we haven't put chairs or tables in the room yet.
Right.
So it's you've got to think that through.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And the same is true on the load out as well, like putting that down on paper, what needs to come out first. So in reverse, the stage backdrop has to come off first. Then all of the staging needs to come out so that the rig can come down. And
Yeah, Jodi, can you talk a little bit too about the value of having a team that you trust, that you know can handle issues when they arise?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to that earlier. I think I do tend to work with a lot of the same partners repeatedly, partly because of, whatever it is, whatever equipment it is that they might have, but mostly because I value and enjoy my work better when I'm working with people that I have a solid relationship with.
Right.
And so when something goes sideways, because it's going to, I know that the crew on site, in this case with Heroic, is fixing stuff before I probably even know that something's happening. And they are highly skilled at what they do, and that they've got the capability to be able to jump in and fix it. And they're amazing with my internal people. All of that stuff matters. Like, they have a file that says, here's where the power is and here's how you rig, especially in a place that's complicated. Like, that saves me time, energy, helps me sleep at night. I tell Jon that a lot. Like, part of the reason I use you guys is because I sleep better during events, knowing that, like, if something goes sideways, they've got it.
Yeah.
And I've witnessed it happen. And so I know that that relationship is going to pay dividends in the long run.
And we don't bring the ice cream maker anymore.
Okay, so let's talk really quickly about post-event. I think that's a piece that a lot of event planners maybe miss. It's done, it's over. I kind of want to forget about it.
Well, you're moving on to the next thing.
Moving on to the next thing, yeah. So, what are some examples or tips that you have in the process of the event happening, that for collecting that kind of data that you can come back and have a meeting about after the fact?
Well, I personally take a lot of notes during an event. I am the quintessential nerdy event planner that runs around with a clipboard at events, but I always have sheets of paper in there where I'm able to write notes for, like, do this next year, change this next year, don't forget this. And then it can be difficult, because especially when you're running from event to event to event on either side.
Yep.
But I do think debrief meetings are valuable. But on the spot feedback from the crew that's on site or from my planning team is important to record and then talk about it at a debrief meeting at some point in the process, sooner rather than later, after an event, where you can say, I loved this. This was perfect. This didn't go exactly how I thought it was going to go. Is there a way we could have done that differently? I think helps avoid the situation, especially for repeat events, where you think about it in the moment and then next year you make the same mistake again. And then you're like, man, why do we keep doing this?
Right.
We do. In the case of Augsburg, our production manager is Dustin, and he and all of our PMs on every show do an after action report each day of each event that I get and our management team gets, and they're super helpful. And that's just started the last couple of years. We need to share that with Jodi and her team, and their version of that with us. It's communication. And how do we make this better? We're in this for the long haul. How do we make this better?
Well, and again, I think a lot of the way that, because I do have a good relationship, especially with a lot of the crew that's on site, like, I'm able to address questions or issues like in the moment. So I don't love the way that thing looks. Can we fix that? And if the answer is no, because of, the lights are already rigged or whatever, then we know we can address that for the next year, kind of talk through it with whoever it is that's the expert on that thing at the moment. So I'm a big believer in, like, real-time conversations about things, because otherwise something's going to pop into your head and you might make a note about it, and you try to describe that to somebody later and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I don't remember that, or that didn't happen, or
I don't know what light thing that you're talking about that happened. And so
right, makes sense. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for your expertise. Before we move on to questions, because we definitely want to get to questions, if you guys have questions that are on the line here, feel free to type them in right now and we'll go ahead and answer some of those here in a minute. We just wanted to make sure we gave you a few bits of information. If you're wondering about an event and want to have a more specific call and go through some of these steps that we talked about today, there's some contact information for you guys to use. There's also an event venue checklist on the Heroic website that you can make use of, and it's a great piece of content that can help you maybe start thinking about things differently than you have in the past. And don't forget, we'll be sending the webinar recording. So if you want to review, there was a lot of great little nuggets that the two of these people shared today. And so we'll be sending that so you can review that information. So now we know it's a little bit past our ending time. So if you have time to stay on, we'll answer some questions. Otherwise, we'll send those in the recording as well. So we thank everybody for spending some time with us today. And thanks to these two for their expertise as well. Okay, so let's move into some questions here for a few minutes. Let's see, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned over the years that you could share and help other people avoid? Or maybe the one, let's say the one.
Don't assume. It's all, again, we keep using the word communication, but if you assume, that just leads down to the path of higher budgets, problems, anxiety. Everybody gets stressed. And if you, Jodi is the quintessential non-assumer. She asks lots of questions, and she sometimes thinks they're not good questions. They are not. She has a purpose for asking them. Every customer / vendor relationship, you have to be able to talk to each other. And if you assume that's a problem, then you're heading to a problem.
I would say along those lines, I think that it can be really tempting, and I spend a lot of time talking to people about this in my day-to-day, of not just assuming it will work out. Like, oh, it'll be fine. That's like, I hate that term. It'll be fine. Like, it will be fine because I will have a detailed plan written out that explains exactly how we are going to get from A to B. It might not happen exactly how I have it written down, but because I have thought it through, my ability to react in the moment when something doesn't go particularly well is so much greater. And it allows me to not panic in the moment, because the second I panic, everyone around me panics. It allows me to have thought through some contingency plans ahead of time if need be. So I think it can be really hard to get some people that you might be working with in your day-to-day to get behind that, because it can be easier, less time consuming. And a lot of people just their brains don't think that way.
Right.
But I think my job is to make sure that we have gone through all of that work so that we're better prepared.
Makes sense. So just thinking about the idea of, like, you plan many events in a year, but do you think that there's value in getting if you're somebody who does multiple events, or even maybe 3 events in a year, value in getting your teams together, maybe kind of this time of year, to say, okay, 2019, here's how many events we're looking to do. Here's kind of, maybe some of those big things that I saw that I want to try to move forward, that kind of thing. Can you speak a little bit to what value that might have?
Yeah, I think this probably varies a little bit from company to company, depending on what their procurement rules are and those kinds of things. But in my case, I have found it to be incredibly beneficial especially in the situation with audiovisual. I have a kind of a standard group of events that we do with Heroic every year. And so I'm able to sit down with them before any of them happen and talk through the basics of them. Here's the date, here's the location, here's what we're trying to, for the most part, accomplish with this event.
Sure.
We might not be fully there yet, but generally speaking, that allows we sign multi-event contracts with them then. So that allows us to have that partnership in place and secured. That allows them to be more flexible. It allows us to be more flexible. I think it gives us a better long-term working relationship. So I'm pretty confident that, like, I am getting the best value and the best relationship in the long run. So I try to do that. We meet regularly with our rental companies. We meet regularly with our catering companies. It's important to me that we do have those sort of informal touch bases to start talk through, like, this is going great, this is not going so great, in a way that doesn't feel so like in the moment for an event. I think that helps.
I think that I just would add one thing about that from a Augsburg University side. If we're talking about 3 events rather than just one and one and one, they have the most leverage in a positive way. It's to say, here's what we would like to do, and what can we do to make that be the most efficient and the most economical to give us the fit and finish that we want, and all of those things. They have leverage on that, and I think that Jodi also understands that from our side, that's consistent revenue for us.
Right.
So we know that we can count on that, and I look at that as a win-win for both sides, because we can help. She helps us, we help her. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, one final question I think we'll end on, which is, I know trends are important, but have you seen any trends, or can you think of any trends that event planners should be looking out for in the coming year?
One that comes to mind immediately for me is timetables are getting tighter and tighter and tighter.
You stole mine.
I thought I might. So, and Jodi can add to this too, but it's crazy. What used to be Augsburg or any other customer would say, in a year or 2 years from now, we're going to do this event. That has now come down to months in many cases, and in some cases, weeks. And last year we had a call from a customer on a Friday to load in Monday morning because their vendor had dropped the ball. Now, that's not timetable issue, but it happens. But we get more and more, it's 90 days is our timetable for getting ready for an event.
Wow.
So that's really changed.
Yeah, and I think I was just a part of a sort of industry conversation where we spent some time talking about that, and part of it is this weird balance of the way that budgets are being allocated and the way that corporate companies are spending their marketing dollars, and they're getting more comfortable with making more last minute decisions about where they're going to be in a place, how much money they're going to spend. And then I would add, from my perspective also, I think that the end users are getting more educated about events and what things cost, and about how to find resources. And so they're coming into that conversation at a different place. And so I think that there's more coming at the table from a event planner who might have already gone out and done some research and is coming to the table with decisions made in their mind and what they believe something should cost.
Sure.
That isn't necessarily super accurate, because they could be finding that information online somewhere. And that idea of the commoditization that we were talking about earlier, I think that's becoming more and more of a thing, because people are used to like buy a thing, go out, find it, go the Amazon effect, right? Like
Totally.
I can order it, I can get it in a day. I don't understand why you're telling me that I have to pay extra for that. I don't understand why you're telling me that I have to give you more notice than that, or, any number of things. I think that's becoming more and more of a reality for people that are providers in the industry. So I think that's probably going to continue for I think that's going to continue being something we see happen more and more.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your insight, and thank you again, everybody on the call, for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it, and we'll again be sending you the webinar recording in a few days, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again.